Hello, and welcome to another episode of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. I'm your host, Bryan DeAngelis, a partner here at Penta, and I'm particularly excited about today's episode. It's mixing both work and some of my personal hobbies. It's tying in some of my past as well as some of my future. I have a great guest to join us, Mike McCann, and we're going to talk about the PGA LIV potential merger. Despite my high handicap, I love golfing and have been following this closely. I think it's a really fascinating antitrust issue, but also just anytime you get the sports world involved in DC, it becomes particularly fun and interesting. And Mike and I were actually colleagues many, many years ago in one of my first jobs, which was for then Congressman Marty Meehan. I know Mike and his family quite well and have followed Mike's great work for a while. For those of you who may not know Mike, Mike is a professor of law at the University of New Hampshire, the founding director of the Sports and Entertainment Law Institute. He's one of the smartest sports legal minds, I think, in the country. He's doing that work right now for Sportico, and you should check out his articles there. He's also co-authored a great book on name, image, and likeness that I had the pleasure of reading a few years ago and talking to Mike about. That's with Ed O'Bannon of UCLA, Court Justice, the inside story of my battle against the NCAA. Mike, pretty impressive bio. Glad to say I knew you back when, but thank you for coming on the show.
Bryan, thanks for having me on, and it's great to reconnect and collaborate again. We worked years ago, and it's nice to join up forces once again.
Always a pleasure. So when I was talking to some people around the office about what's happening with the PGA and LIV, it's something I've followed for a while out of some personal concerns. But when I started talking about this podcast, you were just the perfect guest I had in mind. Talk to us a little bit, maybe just start at the beginning. You've been covering this really since day one. Break down kind of what's going on here for the audience.
Yeah. So when word came that Saudi Arabia, through the Public Investment Fund, was thinking about putting together a pro golf league, immediately there were legal controversies that are associated with that, in addition to political ones that we can discuss. But the legal ones would be, how could this league hire golfers, the best golfers, to join when those golfers are already under contract to the PGA Tour? And could they play in two leagues at once? That's an unusual arrangement in pro sports. We normally don't see that. We've seen it in tennis at times. We've seen it in rodeo, of all things. You never know the kinds of legal controversies that can surface. And that was the initial question. And then later on, it turned out that once the league was formed, the PGA Tour said, you can't leave the PGA Tour. You're a member, you're under contract, or if you do, you're going to be in violation of your membership contract. And it was clear the PGA Tour had the contractual ability to do that. And then, of course, we saw some golfers who left the PGA Tour and were suspended sue the PGA Tour, arguing that the PGA Tour is a monopoly, that it has too much control over competition for golf services. Particularly, it's a monopsony, and that the argument is that it's a monopsony and that it has too much control as a buyer of services, the services being those offered by elite golfers. And that triggered a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit in California that had other pieces to it. And of course, the PGA Tour was really winning the litigation because the problem, LIV's fundamental problem, is that it was paying the golfers more. So it's difficult to show damages if you're a golfer, if you're actually making more money.
And in many cases, a lot more money.
Yeah, a lot more money. So, I mean, it was fascinating to watch, and obviously it's still going on, but it's morphed into something else.
And Mike, you mentioned monopoly, and maybe help me break this down a little bit, but is the PGA an approved monopoly in the same sense that, you know, the Major League Baseball and the NFL and the U.S. Olympic Committee, like, they are sort of sanctioned, approved kind of monopolies, even if not 100% got the language right there. They're kind of allowed to act in that way. Is the PGA any different than those entities?
It's different in the sense that it doesn't have a collective bargaining relationship with the athletes. And baseball, NBA, football, hockey, they all have collective bargaining agreements with unions on behalf of those players. And under federal law, there's something called the non-statutory labor exemption, which basically says when management and union agree to a policy impacting wages, hours, or other working conditions like drug testing, it's exempt from antitrust scrutiny. I mean, it's kind of condensing a larger topic into a sentence, but that's the gist of it. And the PGA Tour doesn't have that. The PGA Tour enters into membership contracts with golfers. The golfers are independent contractors. They're not employees. So they're not part of a union. So it's a different relationship, and it's more vulnerable to antitrust scrutiny because there is no labor exemption.
So going back to the lawsuit, as you said, I think the players that left to LIV had a tough case to prove. I mean, who knows what would have happened or what may still happen. But hard time arguing kind of the damages. I say that to also get to the broader point of once LIV came out, this was a pretty intense battle, right? There was relationships strained. The PGA fought this with everything they had. Pretty big public fight on this, which made this announcement a few weeks ago that they would be joining together quite a shock to the system. I want to get into some of the testimony in a minute, but as you've been following it closely, I mean, were you as shocked? Did you see this coming?
I did not see them joining forces. That's for sure. That's not something I saw. I don't know anyone who saw that coming. I did see the case settling, and my expectation was that they would settle and that they would just go on in their lives, that there would be a PGA Tour, there would be LIV, and there would be two leagues. And it would be good for golfers, right? Because then they would have both to play off each other and maybe use one against the other as leverage. So that was how I thought it would end. I did not expect them to join forces, particularly given how the sort of animosity shown by each side, and particularly their lawyers, as part of the litigation. I mean, that I listened in on the hearings, the court hearings. They were available on Zoom, and these lawyers really detested each other. I mean, they were respectful, but this was a level of competition that you just normally don't see, and also very high caliber lawyers on both sides. So it had a really interesting quality to it, and to see it end. And especially after the PGA Tour really kind of pressured golfers to stay
pretty aggressively,
and loyalty, right? Like being, talking about. I mean, in one sort of accompanying litigation, the PGA Tour was looking for from a company affiliated with LIV to turn over emails that reference 9/11, that reference terrorism. I mean, we're really trying to play up the Saudi Arabia is not your friend, is not our friend as Americans, and then for them to suddenly join hands. Shocking.
Yeah. And I'm glad you raised that because, I mean, this did get pretty personal and pretty aggressive. I mean, there were many groups of 9/11 families that got involved that were petitioning Biden and others to, crack down on this. And there were some pretty hard lines drawn in the sand that, this was quite a shock when then the announcement was made. And obviously, there's some serious concerns around what Saudi Arabia is doing. And, we'll talk about that in a minute. But I guess, partly from the testimony in front of Congress a few weeks ago, but I'm sure you've heard more from these guys too. What is the PGA Tour's rationale now of why they needed to do this?
The PGA Tour, as far as I can tell, based on testimony and what I've heard, genuinely doesn't believe it can compete with LIV because of LIV's money. That even though the PGA Tour was winning the litigation, the horizon was such that winning wouldn't have really mattered because the LIV has $700 billion through the Public Investment Fund. And essentially, the PGA Tour can't compete financially, and their belief is that they would ultimately lose lose out. And, there's a part of me that says, well, that's a shame, right? That they really, right? I mean, this is the PGA Tour. This has been around for a long time. This is kind of a part of the American identity. And for them to testify in a way that suggests they were capitulating.
With that point, I mean, the PGA, I'm viewing this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as just a fan of the game, I am viewing this as the PGA caving to LIV. And to me, that strongly suggests that the PGA I know and love may be going away if this goes forward and is true. And really what's happening is LIV will swallow up the PGA. I think the PGA is trying to say they'd have a little more control and this is how they're preserving their future. But I mean, am I close to what you're seeing too out there in terms of how this would move forward if regulators and others allowed it?
Yeah, and this was something that came up in the congressional testimony where the PGA Tour said, well, look, we control the board, basically, of this new entity. But Senator Blumenthal and several others said, well, wait a second, who's providing the money? Right? Usually the entity that provides the money has ultimate control.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that to me, that makes sense to me. That, yes, even if this board has a predominance of PGA Tour representatives, if LIV is funding this, LIV is going to have ultimate say. And it came up with, what can golfers actually say? Can they criticize the Saudi government? Is there non-disparagement language impacting what they can do? These are all like big questions that are unresolved.
Yeah, and bigger political questions of, is this sports washing by the Saudi government that, has a pretty troublesome track record that I think our listeners know well? And are they using this to just, create a facade and kind of using what we love, our PGA and those actors to do that? Which kind of begs the question, Mike, too. I hope I'm not taking too much of a tangent. Like, this is totally unprecedented, at least in my memory and knowledge bank. Maybe you have an example, but this is, to me, this is not like the NBA acquiring the ABA or, even NFL and XFL trying to compete situation. This is, government money, a foreign agent, taking over one of our sports leagues. So maybe a two-part question for you. One, I think that's totally unprecedented. I don't think we've ever seen this before. And two, does that mean we're going to see a lot more of this? Will we start seeing foreign governments, investment funds like this buying Major League Baseball teams or football teams or whole leagues in the near future?
Yeah, I can't think of another example like this. This is unprecedented. And to have a foreign government's wealth fund purchase essentially an American sport, obviously there's more to it than that, but that's kind of the gist of what's going on. And we could see it elsewhere. Now, some of the leagues are set up to not allow this. There are rules about wealth funds. Like the NBA has restrictions on non-persons basically buying teams, and the NFL does as well. So there are the four major leagues are constructed to not essentially allow something like this, although perhaps it could come through some other vehicle. But I don't think we're going to see anything like this with those leagues. But I do think we could see tennis. I think we could see other sports that are where the athletes are not in a union. Potentially this could come up again. I mean, it's hard to know. There's mixed martial arts is another sport where we could see the Saudis try to create their own league to compete with UFC. There are a lot of ways this could play out.
Mike, given all the concerns we just spent the first half of this episode talking about, I just personally see a very, very tough road through U.S. regulators, DOJ, Congress. And, as at the time of this recording, we're about a week after the congressional hearings around this. And you've mentioned Senator Blumenthal a little bit, but there was some pretty bipartisan, objections and concern, and I would say some pretty aggressive concerns about this merger. Talk to us a little bit. What did you see in that hearing? What stuck out as some of the big hurdles that this quote unquote merger will have to overcome?
Yeah, as you said, Brian, bipartisan scrutiny, I thought was very telling. This was one where Senator Blumenthal, I think, led the way, but we also saw Senator Hawley mention his concerns about the PGA Tour doing business in other countries. His focus was on China, but the same sort of structural criticism was being leveled. And there are real concerns from an antitrust perspective about whether or not this Super League will violate federal antitrust law. The DOJ's antitrust department could certainly argue that it does. I remember writing about how could the PGA Tour and LIV settle without creating a league that tries to control pro golf across the globe. Well, that's what they've kind of done to a large extent, right? So now maybe they strike a deal with the DOJ. It sounds like they've already made some concessions based on what the DOJ has signaled to them. But it does appear that this is going to face some real regulatory scrutiny.
I want to come back to Congress and DOJ in a second, but it also strikes me that there's probably other government agencies that need to take a serious look at this. I mean, certainly CFIUS, which, monitors foreign investment into U.S. companies. I imagine the State Department, given, again, the kind of long history of kind of problematic issues from Saudi Arabia. Do you get a sense anyone else is digging into this too?
I think we could certainly see other countries, particularly those that want to engage in sports washing, to use this as a vehicle of promoting their identity in a way that's favorable to Americans. I mean, China would seem like, to me, a country that would have financial wherewithal and sort of incentive to do this. And how quickly this plays out, I don't know. But I certainly could see this being adopted by other countries.
And in terms of back to Congress for a minute, where do you think they go next following this hearing?
Yeah, it's a good question. My guess is they defer to the DOJ as a next step. I think that they know that the DOJ is investigating this, and I don't know if another hearing would yield different types of testimony. They clearly want to have officials from LIV and PIF speak, so that would be, I think, programmatically the next step is to have officials from those entities come to testify. But beyond that, my guess is that, especially given that we probably don't see a lot of activity until the DOJ takes action. And maybe we see something from the DOJ this fall.
You think something possibly that quickly?
Well, you figure this deal, they're in communication. I mean, it's very clear that LIV and the PGA Tour are in communication with the DOJ, because LIV and the PGA Tour lifted a restriction on how they compete with each other. And at least as reported by the New York Times, that was done in response to scrutiny by the DOJ. So it does seem like there's some sort of communication between the two. And if that's the case, it means the DOJ is pretty active on this. So I think if the DOJ is going to do something, it likely would try to do it before there's some final deal.
Right.
Particularly if the PGA Tour and LIV are telling the DOJ, look, we'll do what you want. Tell us how to make this work for you. Maybe that's what they're saying.
Interesting. Yeah. I cannot imagine Senator Blumenthal, knowing him as I know him, will be giving this up anytime soon, even to Biden's DOJ. So it'll be fascinating to watch.
Well, Senator Blumenthal, I thought, really raised a number of great questions, and I don't think the answers were great, to be honest, to his questions. I mean, and part of it's, when you don't have the content to give a good answer, you can't give a good answer. But his passion for this is clear, and I agree. He'll stay on this.
He will. And Mike, are you seeing anything, this will be kind of a global league. Does LIV or PGA have to go through a similar process in Europe or any other government bodies?
Yeah, it reminds me of Microsoft's deal with Activision. Same set of sort of any country where they're doing business,
Yeah.
they're vulnerable to antitrust, or Europe, they'll say competition law. So yeah, the short answer is this could get held up in Europe. The DP World Tour is part of this. So England, I mean, there's other ways in which this runs into regulatory resistance. And maybe it won't be in the US, although it could, but certainly in Europe and England, we could see regulators there say, this is just, you're eliminating competition. And that's bad for the market.
Yeah, we've been following Microsoft Activision closely, and yeah, I can imagine it'll be a similar tough road there as well. Let me wrap up. I just want to shift back to the players and the fans for a minute. So first with players, we mentioned obviously those players that left and sued, but you had a lot of players that also stayed and got pretty aggressive, in their language. You also have to think about their sponsorships and how brands and other companies think about this new tour. Are we seeing, anything among the players that they're okay with how this is moving forward? And likewise, you think about Nike, you think about other brands, are they weighing the concerns of still being as vocal as they are and as big of a moneymaker as it is in the sport of golf if things move forward?
It seems like a lot of golfers have said in so many words, they don't really know what's going on, that there hasn't been communication and that they're reading the same accounts that the mainstream public is reading, which is, I think, partly a reflection of the fact that there's no players union, right? There's no entity with which to communicate. So I think we'll see periodic statements by golfers. I don't, at least yet, see the kind of fury that we saw before with some leaving the PGA Tour and being upset about being suspended. I think right now the comments have been a little bit more muted. And similarly, sponsors are going to, I think, proceed cautiously because sponsors, at the end of the day, they want to see this work, right? They have money invested in this. They don't want to see controversy and disruption to the sport. They have a stake in seeing fans like golf and buy golf products and all of that. So thus far, it seems like they've proceeded cautiously and probably cheering on some sort of resolution that avoids the Department of Justice, that avoids more congressional hearings, that avoids critical commentaries. But, it'll be interesting to see it all play out.
Yeah. And it's, a lot of the work we do here is helping companies from all industries, but kind of navigate these tough stakeholder, political, social moments. And, you think about, I know these companies must be weighing like how much is Saudi Arabia going to be involved in that board? How much pressure is going to be on them? Are they going to let players and sponsors be vocal on certain issues they want to be vocal on? And that'll be really the big test and maybe the next chapter in this. But it is obviously everyone wants to see golf succeed. And if you're a company, I'm using Nike as an example, but you've obviously got a lot of money invested and have a lot of revenue being generated from the game, but you've got your own kind of company standards, your, beliefs and values that if those two start clashing, this is going to be a very difficult environment for those companies.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly if golf consumers make a strong association between whatever this league ends up being and Saudi Arabia and human rights or Saudi Arabia's role in September 11th. I mean, all of these things that could pose all sorts of complications for the sport and in terms of generating fandom. And it's tricky. it's going to be really tricky.
It's going to be messy. Yeah.
Yeah. And will this be, the more it's a PGA Tour league or perceived as it, probably the better for the sponsors.
Yeah. And my last question, because you've already given us a little bit to look forward to in the future, which is, I think keep an eye on Blumenthal and Hawley, but certainly whatever the DOJ does over the next few months and this fall, we'll be keeping an eye on. So let me end with that last point you made. I'm curious where the fans are on this. I mean, speaking from a personal experience, I didn't really follow LIV or jump into it. A lot of the Instagram channels and other golf content I consume seem to be pretty agnostic between the two leagues when they were fighting. Most fans just seem to like good golf. Are you seeing anything in terms of fans expressing an opinion, or is this all going way over their head?
I think for most fans, they just want to watch golf. So this is going to be, I mean, they're no doubt aware of this. They're probably focused on how will this affect their fandom? What is this new league? We don't know because it's not a done deal, right? So What will this be in terms of tournaments, in terms of where players are playing? Does the PGA Tour and LIV continue as leagues while there's this Super League? That's actually not clear based on what we've been told. So I think as a fan, they may be thinking about how will this affect how they follow the sport and their favorite golfers. My guess is a lot of them are not focused on the sort of role of Saudi Arabia in this, the human rights concerns, et cetera, that we heard raised during the Senate hearing.
Yeah. And again, the broader concerns of foreign governments getting involved in sports and activities like this in general. But
I think that's something I think we're going to hear a lot more on that in Congress in the years ahead. Whether it trickles down to sort of like, does this affect a typical fan watching a game? I don't know. But the more we see this happen, I think there'll be more scrutiny of it and more congressional hearings.
I mean, it's an obvious point and maybe an understatement. I don't think Hawley's alone, where a lot of Congress will start focusing on, well, isn't China next or even Russia after that? And how do we keep kind of tabs on this and our own controls on it? So there'll be a lot to look forward to and watch closely over the next couple of months. But Mike, let's leave it there. I encourage everyone to follow Mike and follow his reporting on this. He's doing some excellent work. Mike, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
You got it. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And to our listeners, thank you for listening to this week's episode of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. As always, I'm your host, Bryan DeAngelis. For new episodes of What's at Stake and the Macrocast, subscribe to the Penta podcast channel wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can follow us on Twitter at PentaGRP for more updates. We'll see you back here again next week.